Oh, sorry about that, Vicky. I started the channel before you finished the instructions, and that's what happened.
I was like, oh no. Please, if you're using a cell phone, a tablet, or any other device, please click on the three dots at the top right corner of your screen, and you'll look for the interpretation globe. Select that, then select English. And that way you will be able to hear any comments or questions made in Spanish on the English channel. Thank you so much. This concludes the instructions for the Spanish and the English channels.
Right, thank you, Vicky, for the introduction. Once again, my name is Mohsen Nazemi, and I'm the Chief of Engineering Division at San Diego County Air Pollution Control District, or the district for short. Welcome to our public meeting for our 2024 Air Toxic Hotspots Annual Report. Please note that the meeting is being recorded, as you probably heard a couple of times already, and will be posted on District's YouTube page tomorrow. And we will put a link into the chat so you can go to the YouTube channel or copy the link if you want to review it again tomorrow. We would like to start by introducing the panel members. I introduced myself. Nick Horace, who will follow me, is a senior engineer supervisor in charge of the Air Toxics and Health Risk Assessment Program unit. And Stephen is also one of our program coordinators for the engineering division. With that, thank you for attending the public meeting to discuss the status of this report. Under the Hotspots program, the district is required to prepare an annual report, and the report we're discussing this evening is to meet the requirements for calendar year 2024 and provide some critical actions completed in 2024, as well as accomplishments of the program since 2021. The draft of the 2024 report was released and posted on the district's website on April 24, 2025, and sent out via the district's Gov Delivery subscription services on the same day. Our goal this evening is to briefly discuss the Hotspots report for 2024 and receive input related to the draft report. So first, I would like to ask Nick Horace to provide a short overview of the Air Toxic Hotspots program. And we would appreciate if you can hold your comments and questions to the end of the presentation. And you can enter your comments or questions into the chat or use the hand raise function so we can unmute you to ask your question. And with that, I will turn it over to Nick Horace.
Thanks, Mohsen. Good evening. Again, I am Nick Horace, Senior Engineer with the district. And I have a brief presentation before we open the meeting up to questions and comments from the public. The California Air Toxics Hotspots Act, proposed under Assembly Bill 2588, was enacted in 1987 to evaluate potential health risks from toxic air contaminants emitted by stationary sources. Under the program, the district evaluates potential health risks created by toxic emissions from stationary sources and requires public notification and health risk reductions for facilities that create elevated health risks. State law requires air districts to review emissions from facilities every 4 years and identify facilities that can potentially create elevated health risks. Those facilities are then required to quantify potential health risks by preparing a health risk assessment. If the calculated health risks from any facility exceed the thresholds of the rule, they're required to conduct public notification and risk reduction requirements. So one thing that's important to highlight is that the requirements of this program, which are public notification and risk reduction, only apply to potential health risks that come from air toxic emissions from individual stationary sources. So stationary sources include factories, manufacturing plants, power plants, shipyards, landfills, rock or asphalt plants, and other industrial, commercial, and government operations. So stationary sources do not include mobile sources specifically, so such as trains, trucks, ships, and other mobile sources. And air toxics are chemicals in the form of gases, liquids, or particles that are emitted into the atmosphere, and when people are exposed to them in certain quantities, that may cause adverse health effects. Adverse health effects can range from symptoms such as minor eye or throat irritation, or headaches, to more serious conditions such as cancer, birth defects, or damage to various organs. The nature and severity of health effects vary by the type and quantity of pollutants, the duration of exposure, distance from the source, and the sensitivity of the individual. Again, this program looks at potential health risks from stationary sources of air pollution and does not include potential health risks from other sources of air pollution that communities might be exposed to, or the potential health risk associated with other factors that can include health risks such as diet, genetics, and smoking. So while the Hotspots program only provides localized potential impacts from a single source of pollution, the reductions in health risk from a single source helps reducing the overall cumulative health risks that communities are exposed to. So this slide shows the various thresholds for public notification and risk reduction in District Rule 1210 for various types of health risks, which are core elements of the program. Public notification ensures the public's right to know about possible health risks from exposure to air toxic emissions from stationary sources. We will discuss the different types of health risks in a moment. Risk reduction requirements involve the development and implementation of a plan to reduce the health risks associated with air toxic emissions. Facilities subject to risk reduction are required to submit an application with a plan to the district proposing changes to their processes to reduce health risks. As an example, a facility could propose to install a control device to reduce toxic emissions, or propose changing the usage of materials containing toxic pollutants, replacing equipment which emits toxic air emissions with something that doesn't, or relocating the operation to increase the distance between the operation and offsite receptors. So both public notification and risk reduction is required if the cancer risk is equal to or greater than 10 in the million, and cancer burden is equal or greater than 1. For non-cancer health risks, the threshold for public notification and risk reduction requirements is an acute or short-term or chronic, which is long-term, hazard index of equal to or greater than 1.0. Health hazard index, or HHI, is the ratio of each pollutant concentration divided by a reference concentration at which there is a potential that adverse health impacts may occur. So now I'm going to go over our actions for 2024. So in 2024, we completed 93 emission inventories from sources that may emit air toxic emissions. These inventories are very important as they quantify air toxic emissions from stationary sources and preliminarily identify which sources can potentially create elevated health risks. 19 health risk assessments were approved. So health risk assessments estimate in detailed potential negative health effects that sources of air pollution can create. So essentially of that 93 where inventories were completed, 19 were identified as meeting these health risk assessments that we then eventually approved. Of those, 6 public notifications were initiated. Facilities can potentially create negative health effects are required to notify the communities that are impacted, as we mentioned. Then 3 public meetings were held, and facilities that could potentially create negative health effects are also required to hold an initial and annual public meetings to provide greater public engagement for impacted communities. And just as a note, the reason you see that 6 were initiated but 3 were held is because 3 of them were held very early 2025. And then eventually 6 risk reduction applications were approved. And facilities that can potentially create negative health effects are required to submit a plan to the district on how negative effects can be reduced to meet the applicable thresholds. So now let's talk more specifically about the types of health risks that we evaluate for the purposes of requiring public notification and or risk reduction. So cancer risk is the probability that a person would contract cancer if exposed to a specific level of emissions for 30 years. Cancer risk is expressed in terms of the increased number of chances in 1 million of developing cancer. Health hazard index is a little different. It's calculated for non-cancer health effects and includes both acute, so short-term impacts such as skin or eye irritation, as well as chronic or long-term impacts such as bronchitis or asthma. A health hazard index value below 1.0 indicates that adverse health effects from exposure to air toxic emissions are unlikely, whereas a value of 1 or above indicates that they're possible for certain individuals. So that HHI is essentially a ratio of the amount that someone might be exposed to the safe level. And that's different than cancer risk, where it effectively treats it as there's no safe level of the pollutant. So cancer burden, again, is an estimate of the number of people that can contract cancer within a population that would be exposed to a certain level of air toxic emissions for 70 years. Okay. Now I'm going to talk about some of the overall program accomplishments since 2021. So overall, we've approved 13 risk reduction plans, and recognizing the pressing need to safeguard the health and well-being of our communities. The district governing board in 2021 adopted requirements aimed at reducing potential health risks from cancer by a staggering 10-fold. This critical decision, in addition to other rule changes adopted by the governing board, resulted in accomplishments that are going to be presented on this slide. This isn't just data or statistics. It's about the health and safety of our families, our neighbors, and our future generations. So of those 13 risk reductions plans that have been approved and fully implemented, this resulted in risk reduction and protection from elevated health risks for over 2,000 residences, 1 public park, and over 78 businesses. And I'm going to show on the next slide here a map so you can see where each of these sources is located. So first, this map shows where the facilities that had to reduce health risks are located, as well as the status of their efforts. So first, we're going to look at these Green Star facilities. So these are facilities that were required to submit health risk reduction plans to the district, and the district approved those risk reduction plans, and they have been implemented. So you can see those here. You see a lot of sand, rock, aggregate, concrete, asphalt production facilities. So a lot of these are either quarries or locations that are making asphalt for paving or concrete. And those, a lot of them have risk reduction plans implemented. We also have a couple of aerospace manufacturing facilities, and then some shipyards down in the port side area. Next, we're going to look at the blue stars. So blue stars are risk reduction plans that have been approved but have not yet been implemented. And so one of these here is a landfill gas to energy facility. So basically the landfill is producing a mixture of methane and other gases, and that gets burned to produce power. There's some toxic emissions from that. And then there's a wastewater treatment plant that's also implementing a plan. Then finally, we have some new plans that are under review, and we haven't gone through our full review yet. These include a landfill. There's two more of those mineral products facilities I mentioned, the sand rock aggregate type facilities. There's one industrial manufacturing facility that does kind of welding and miscellaneous metalwork type operations, and then one more shipyard that's required to implement a plan. So now let's look at some more details here about specifically the risk reductions plans that are in 2024. So you can get an idea of what types of pollutant reduction measures people are employing. So the first one is a rock crushing, sand and aggregate production type facility. So this facility was able to reduce emissions by implementing enhanced watering controls of quarry areas. So it prevents dust from forming when materials being moved around, scooped up, dumped, that sort of thing. And then some restrictions on how much they're allowed to blast out of the quarry, the mining operation that limits their emissions. And that's how they were able to reduce their risk. Next, we have a hot mix asphalt plant. They were able to install more efficient filters in their bag house. Bag house controls the dust and particles that come from the asphalt production equipment. So that's how they reduced risk. We had another rock crushing sand aggregate facility. They paved some of their haul roads and then are also applying dust suppressant to others. So the dust suppressant basically serves to stabilize the unpaved haul road so that it doesn't generate as much dust. Then we had an aerospace manufacturing facility that was able to reduce emissions from their abrasive blasting process. Abrasive blasting is basically using a hard material that's blasted at high pressure to remove material from a surface or either condition that surface to be able to use it later manufacturing. Then we had another rock crushing sand and aggregate facility that reduced risk partially by actually moving some of their haul roads further away from residences, and then also applying dust suppressant and enhanced watering to other areas of their haul roads. And finally, we have a landfill gas combustion facility that is proposing to install oxidation catalysts to reduce emissions of formaldehyde from those landfill gas engines. So landfill gas, when it's burned, you get some incomplete combustion, which is where not all the methane burns, and that can form some formaldehyde. And they're going to be putting on what are very similar to catalytic controls on a car, but it's a slightly different chemical process that's designed just for this type of engine to reduce those formaldehyde emissions.
Hey, Nick, we have one hand up really quick. I'll unmute them so they can ask a question.
Okay, sure.
Sorry, this is Neil. Just a quick question. Are these risk reduction measures generally, these facilities already implemented these, or are these part of a forthcoming schedule over time? Just in general, I'm curious how quickly facilities are able to implement these measures.
Yeah, it depends on some of these. So one thing is that I've alluded to, I think before, that there's this 4-year timeline for assessing risk, going through the health risk assessment, the risk reduction plan, the public notices, all of this. So what that means is a lot of the time it's about 2 to 3 years past when the emissions occurred that we're now looking at this risk reduction. And a lot of the time in that window, I think a lot of these facilities have already identified that this is a potential that they're going to need to reduce risk. And a lot of them will be very proactive in doing that even before we get to the risk reduction plan. And some of these facilities, I think about half of these actually, I think pretty much implemented all the reductions before we even got to the plan. Of the facilities on this list, the only one that hasn't actually implemented the plan is the one on the bottom, the landfill gas combustion. And it just has to do with the timelines of ordering the equipment and installing it. It's a little different than, some of these others where they were kind of just operational changes that are easier to do. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about some of the public tools that we've developed to help everyone understand these risk numbers, because it's kind of technical. You hear all these numbers to understand how that affects you potentially. So public engagement like that is a core element of our program. And as part of the dedication to accountability, transparency, and community involvement, we've enhanced our interactive mapping tool on the district website. You can see the web address and QR code for the tool on the slide. What this allows you to do is with just a few clicks, anyone can access vital information regarding facilities subject to the program. And that's going to include, you can see which facilities are required to do HRAs, the results of the HRAs once we approve them, and then the public notification and risk reduction requirements. You can see all the documents related to risk reduction applications. Those risk reduction applications, while we're reviewing them, those are open to public comment. You're able to review them, and if you have, questions or any comment on a facility, you're welcome to provide that to us. It also shows the boundaries of the Portside and International Border Environmental Justice Communities and Cal EnviroScreen scores. And what we've done is we've added areas impacted by facilities with risks above public notification thresholds. So see if this works. Yeah, so you can see there the difference in how the tool looked. So this is what it looked like before, and then here's the upgrade we've made to it. And so they're enhanced to not just show the entire notification area, but you're now actually able to see the risk contours plotted on the map, which shows, residents and workers need to have a much more accurate assessment of the risk value at a specific location. And you can see from this that, the risk is always almost always going to be higher the closer to the source of the emissions. And then it will drop off relatively quickly as you get further and further away. So this helps you actually see how that plays out in practice. And as mentioned earlier, the Hotspots program only assesses potential health risks from individual stationary sources, and therefore doesn't include cumulative health risks from multiple stationary sources, and also doesn't include mobile source emissions. And those things instead, we have community level estimates of risk that include all of those cumulative impacts. And finally, as I mentioned, public engagement is a core element of this program. And here's some more tools you can use to stay informed of the updates and new developments under this program. One is the homepage for the district website. The link is going to be posted in the chat there. I think Stephen's going to post that. At the bottom, we have links for our social media accounts. And then I think most importantly, there's an email subscription service for receiving notifications and updates from the district. And this is a really good way to stay informed about the program and other things the district is doing. So you can select Air Pollution Control District News to receive these, or there's going to be some other options if there's other programs you're interested in. There's lots of things that we are, advertising out, in addition to this program. There's other projects, other applications for review, things like that. So if you're interested, it's very good to sign up for those. And then finally, if you want to contact us about this program, including submitting any comments about this draft report, please use the APCD engineering email address shown. So finally, some next steps here. We're going to consider public comments that we received both tonight and then written comments that we received prior to May 24th, 2025. We want to receive your input and answer any questions. If you have comments or input besides what you can think of tonight that you want considered for inclusion in the report that will go to our governing board, please submit them in writing by the close of business on May 24th, 2025. And then finally, we're going to present the final report to the district governing board at their June 12th, 2025 governing board public meeting and ask them to approve the distribution of the final report and proceed with the distribution. As mentioned, our primary goal this evening is to receive your input and feedback. If you have any comments or questions, please either type into the chat or raise your hand to be unmuted. And if you have any questions after this meeting, please use the email address listed in the meeting notice and on the previous slide to submit your comments to the district by May 24th. Thanks.
Thank you, Nick, for the presentation, and thanks everybody for going through this with us. Just as an FYI, there was a number of links put into the chat that I'd like to point to your attention. The first one was the YouTube link for the district's YouTube channel, where this presentation can be reviewed since it's recorded. Anybody who missed the presentation who would like to see it, they can go to that channel. Then there's also a link for the mapping tool that Nick discussed in terms of showing where the locations are and what the isoplets of different risk levels are. If you're interested to sign up to receive distribution notices about the Hotspots program, that's a link that you can sign up for. And then finally, there's a link for the district's air toxic hotspots webpage. And on that webpage, you can also find a draft of the 2024 annual report, which is the topic of this evening's meeting. And if you want to send comments to, again, use the email that's Nick showed you on the previous page. And maybe Stephen, if you can put that one also into the chat, then all the links would be all into the chat. And with that, I will open it up to any comments or questions from the public. So either type it into the chat or raise your hand and Nick can unmute you to ask the question. Neil.
Hello, I asked a question earlier. I didn't introduce myself. I'm Neil Davenport. I do work as an engineer in this area of modeling. You had identified early in the presentation 27 facilities had health risk assessments requested last year, and I'm in the annual report, the draft, and it's back in Appendix B. All 27 are listed, but 13 of the 27, about almost half of them were rescinded. So can the district, what are the reasons why an HRA would be rescinded? I'm aware of why sometimes emission inventories can be revisited, but normally my understanding is when an HRA is requested, there's unusual circumstances behind getting it rescinded, yet about half of them do tend to be rescinded.
Right. Yeah,
It's a good question, Neil. Let me, Nick, try to answer it, and then you can help to provide better information. The reason these risk assessments are rescinded is that after the initial process, as Nick was explaining, well, we take the inventory from various facilities, we create a draft inventory, have the facility review those draft inventories, and then based on the results of the final inventory, we either request the facility to prepare a detailed health risk assessment, because before we do that, we do what we call a screening analysis. We call it prioritization score. And if that score is high, we request a detailed health risk assessment. In doing that, we use some very conservative assumptions. One of them is, for example, is we assume that the receptors are very close to the release point of these emissions, as close as 50 meters sometimes. And the reason we do that is because they didn't provide us more detailed information to show the exact distance to the receptors. However, after we request these health risk assessments, and Neil, as a consultant, you probably know these cost a lot of money to prepare. The facilities start to look at the assumptions that were made in these screening analysis, and they get back to us and let us know that some of those assumptions are not factual because the information wasn't provided to us up front, but then they provide that information to the district, and we verify those distances or emission factors based on actual source test data. Then we rerun those analysis, and if based on the new information, the risk levels are not high enough that requires a more detailed health risk assessment, we actually resend those HRA requests.
Right. Yeah, and just to add to that, I think Neil, you mentioned the emission inventory revision, and that's really what's happening when they're being rescinded. Is that after we've done that prioritization score, the facility will come back to us with these other assumptions. We revise the inventory, and if that no longer shows that the HRA is required, then we rescind it. And that's the majority of the reason that they're rescinded.
However, for those facilities who are participating in this meeting, we really encourage you to get that information to us in the earlier process where we send out the draft inventory. And as of this year, we have actually improved our communications when we send out draft inventories. We also are going to provide prioritization scores. And for the 2024 inventory, we're also going to show the map of the distances that were used in calculating those. So everything should be fairly clear for the facilities during the comment period to get back to us to make sure that we have the correct information.
It all makes sense. I just feel like sometimes my experience is that when the HRA is requested, it's really difficult to touch the inventory because you're approving the inventory usually in the same correspondence that you're requesting the HRA, but yet this, 13 out of 27 suggests that really the district is revisiting the inventory even after approval, which is fine too, but I didn't realize it was such a large proportion of rescinded HRA requests.
Right. Yeah, I think what you see a lot, and just to give an example for everyone of where we might see a revision is the initial emission inventory, for example, might assume that every single piece of equipment is operating all at the same time. And that's going to, on that acute impact, kind of result in a really high score oftentimes. And then a lot of the time, the facility can then look at that and realize that they're actually not operating everything at the same time. And that's pretty typical. And then that's that adjustment. And so I think, to your point about it being difficult to revise the inventory, I think where it does become difficult is that we have regulatory time frames that we need to meet on approving these HRAs. It's basically a year from when we get it, we have to approve it. And what sometimes happens is I think, I understand there are delays, and when someone comes to us at the last week before the deadline and tries to revise the inventory, that's where it becomes challenging. So the key is, just like Mohsen said, it's paying attention to it up front, and if there is a need to revise it, address it right at that time when that HRA is requested.
I agree with all that. Cost time for everybody. It's get the inventories accurate and right the first time.
Thank you, Neil, for your question.
Yeah, thanks.
Anybody else? Just to add, Stephen also actually put the link direct to the annual report that if anybody wants to just go directly to the report, you can also find it on our Air Toxic Hotspots web page, but the link to the report is also in the chat. Thanks, Stephen. Okay, I don't see any questions in the chat. And Nick, does anybody have a hand raised?
Nope, I don't see any.
Okay, once again, I want to thank you all for participating in this public meeting, and it's always good to see and hear from you all that are interested in this. And oh, I see Neil has one more question.
Sorry,
Neil.
I meant to ask, of the public meetings that occurred last year, how many approximately were virtual versus in person? And is the district expectation going forward going to change?
Actually, for those of you who are not familiar with Neil's question, he's asking if these public meetings that facilities are holding, are they going to be virtual or in person? And at this point, we have allowed both styles to be held. Our suggestion, recommendation usually is to hold it virtual. And the main reason for that is more people are able to participate. Going to an evening meeting, with family and other engagements, the traffic and parking and all of that sometimes takes a lot longer than just going to a virtual. And somebody put a comment in the chat: virtual is the way to go. So we encourage holding them virtually because more people can participate, and it's also good because we can provide the presentation at a later time on our webpage the next day as well if somebody misses the virtual meeting. But it could be held in either. We just held one in person last week.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. Once again, I want to thank you all for attending this meeting, and want to thank Nick and Stephen for helping out with this presentation. Please keep in mind that we would like to receive any comments on the draft report by close of business, May 24th, and the address, if Nick can jump to the previous slide where it has the address for submitting comments. It's APCD Engineering at SDAPCD.org. Thank you again for participation, and everybody have a great evening. Thank you.
Thanks.